Hey everybody, Jorge here reviewing, or this is my July wrap up. This is the first time I do a wrap up. Usually I do uh, one one book per video, but this time there were a lot of books, and for the sake of expediency and convenience, I've decided that I'm gonna make a wrap up for this month. I don't know if I feel like I'm not gonna reach many viewers though, so maybe I should just review books individually. I don't know. So just for this month, I figure I'm gonna do a wrap up. And then I was also thinking about this in terms of convenience because later on, when I look back and I want to see one of my reviews, if there's a book that I really liked and or a book that for some reason I'm gonna be rereading in the future, and I could look back on what I thought about the book by watching the video. So I think it's necessary that and almost not necessary, but I think it's really convenient in the way I catalog it, because if I put July wrap up 2017, that's not gonna really tell me anything. I'm not gonna remember what book I read, but I digress. So I'm gonna start with a book that I don't have immediately with me, and that is Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics. I thought it was an interesting book. I thought it was really well written. I thought it was really well thought out, especially when he explained why he has such a simplistic character represent him, and it's supposed to show him as a simple reflection, because he's supposed to represent an idea, not himself necessarily, and that's able to convey his message more than a more realistic depiction of him. And when I first picked it up, I'm not gonna lie, I thought it was like, oh my god, this cheesy artist is trying to, you know, ramble about, the history of comics and all that, and what comics are. And he's just not that good an artist. But that's clearly not the case. He's a good artist. It's just he's smart. He's really smart, and I thought it was really well. What are comics? It makes you really wonder about that. What are comics? What do they what do they do for society, and what is their place, and what is their definition of comics? And it really went through an existential point of view, and I thought it developed its argument really well. It used good examples, and to me, a big important aspect to understanding comics is their place in a canon of sorts, a literary canon. I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 10, 15, 20 years we start seeing comic books in a canon style way, like Harold Bloom style canon. And I wouldn't be surprised if people, they catalog comics the way they do literature, and the place that comics has, and this like inferiority complex that it has, even though comics make a lot of money in the street. Like I saw this like really funny cartoon, a one strip cartoon, one panel cartoon about how a 1955 whatever 1967 Superman comic is worth more than a original copy of Shakespeare, and it was a joke, but the message was clearly conveyed. And even though comics are really expensive, there's still this sense amongst this very mainstream, education, that comics aren't necessarily good for you, and that they're pure escapism. And I just think I'm kind of over the fact that people think that escapism is a bad thing. And whenever they think of escapism, they think of, oh well, this book is is helping you escape from the troubles of your life, and sometimes that's necessary. Like if you're going through such a shitty childhood that you need books to escape, you should by all means do it. You know, it's not a bad thing. They tell you to confront your issues, but you're like fucking 5. Like what the fuck do you know about life? And like how much responsibility do you have as an individual to change your personal life? You don't really have any responsibility. I mean, as long as they're not hurting you. I mean, even if they are hurting you, what difference does it make? Well, I don't know. I guess I'm gonna do. Yeah, I'm gonna make this wrap up. I'm gonna make this wrap up. Yeah, so that's what I thought about. You know, my main preoccupation with that book was, what do you have to say about this inferiority complex that comic book lovers have in the mainstream? I'm not saying everybody has it. I'm not saying most people do. I just think people that don't read comics don't understand comics. And I think that would have been really interesting because people love comics and they have to defend it fiercely, and I think that's really important. And yeah, so it's been 5 minutes and like I need to focus on the rest of my video. So yeah. The next book I read was Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. I thought it was an interesting book. I read through it really quickly. It's a quick, easy, fun read. It has a lot of names. That's all I'm gonna say. It has a lot of unique, different names, and I thought that it just, it kind of left me feeling like I didn't understand a lot of the words because of the names. Everything that actually happened, the myths are really they're easy to follow along. Loki and Thor and Odin, Odin and all the other gods there. Yeah, I just thought, it was, there's a bunch of names thrown at you, and there's a lot of plot thrown at you in like 2 or 3 paragraphs. So I'm gonna say that about the book. But yeah, I still like the book. I think you would enjoy it. Next book. My next book was this one, Ya Gyazi's Homegoing. I thought this book was amazing, guys. I thought it was hugely ambitious. I saw some author interviews. She went to Politics and Prose, and she was interviewed there for about an hour. And there were a bunch of other libraries that interviewed her. And this book really is ambitious. It covers 300 years of history, of Black history, of African history, not African American. Although I will say that there is African Americans covered in this story, but African slavery, I had no idea that was going on. And it was about tribalism, because I was like, why are people selling their slaves? And I was like, is it just merely to make a buck? But it had to do with wars that were going on in Africa, and the European was taking advantage of that. And yeah, this book takes place in Ghana, and it takes place in America. And it doesn't go to Europe, but it easily could have gone to Europe. Although the European presence is felt. And the overall gist I got of this book was that it tried to show how slavery created the modern day African and the African American. I would say African American, not actually African, because there is Africans in this book, that you get the perspective of an African who lives in Africa, and you get to see 2 family lines, and they just trickle down, and like each chapter covers one person's viewpoint, and it makes it's so genius, because she you get to see what happens to one character based on the history, the oral history of another character, if you will. It's like an oral history, and you get to see how she dies, or whether she dies, or there's this, and yeah. So it's a little elliptical, not really. It's actually a really simple book, but I just appreciate its greatness, because its ambition, because it's done so simply, but so much is accomplished. So yeah, I think you should read that book. My next book is Lincoln in the Bardo. I rented this. I borrowed this from my local library, so you can see it's in library binding, and you can see the tag. So yeah, this book was, at first it took me, let me just tell you, this book took me 120 pages in. I was 120 pages in before I finally understood what was going on. I knew what was happening, but I wasn't connecting the dots, and I read the inside flap. I read the first interview, the first review on Amazon, and I understood everything that was going on. I put everything together. And the main thing that I figured, I was really interested in the ghosts. Like, I wasn't so much interested in Lincoln. Even though he was interesting, but that wasn't. It was clear to me that the book was trying to say something about this bardo. This bardo means the transitional state in the Tibetan tradition called the bardo, and it's this transitional state where they're dead, but they haven't gone to the afterlife, so it's kind of the purgatory, and the bardo is a purgatory. And so it's clear that the book is trying to say that, you know, this transitional state, and is trying to speak to the humanity of Lincoln, of Willie, his son, of the Civil War, of slaves, of white people, and it kind of has this very big appeal to the emotions, I want to say, because it really plays out the emotion card a lot. And not gonna lie, it does wear on me a little bit, because but I feel like I'm being an asshole in a way, because I'm like, this is people's lives, and he just lost his son, and you know, you're just heartless for not being empathetic about it. But I don't know if it's that, because I think every author is trying to make an argument, and the argument that he's doing is, not only do we have to look at his argument, but we have to look at the way that he's arguing, and the way he's arguing is highly emotional, and you know, an appeal to the emotions. And I just thought, you know, he played that card very heavily, and it kind of drew, you know, it weighed down on me, and I didn't like it so much in that sense. Aside from that, I found the ghosts really interesting. I found the idea that he would talk about ghosts interesting in itself. So it was a very innovative book. I found it innovative in that the dialogue would come first, and then the character that was the ghost that was speaking would be then mentioned. So this book kind of reads like a play. So yeah, it has that going for it. It reads like a play. You get to see the dialogue boxes. It's kind of like a dialogue box, and you get to see instead of seeing the character's name and then his dialogue or her dialogue, you see the dialogue first and then the character's name. And that goes for most of the book. So it was actually quite a short read. I read it quite quickly, and even though it did take me a while to figure out what was going on, I was still reading it really fast, because the book sometimes it has like 50 chapters in it, and some chapters are like half a page, and including, you know, the indentation space and all that. So yeah, this book was a quick read. Like I said, you know, I'm just gonna leave it with that. It kind of did play to the emotions a lot. It was a good book, but it did do that, and you know, yeah. Some people, I'm sure, feel quite differently about that, because I'm sure that they really felt this emotional pull, and that's because he was aiming for that. And I just think it didn't work on me, because it went overboard with it a little bit. So yeah, my next book was Ernest Hemingway's A Movable Feast. A short history about this book, how I came across this book. I actually bought it when I went to San Francisco. I went to City Lights bookstore, and as always, when I go to a place I don't really know, and it was my first time going to that bookstore, my second time in San Francisco, or third time, and this time I was by myself, and my scope of literature and my knowledge of it was purely canonical. It was pretty deep, but it was mostly canonical, and I didn't like Hemingway when I read him, But I thought I would give him another chance because what was happening was that when I went to college, all the books I read in high school, I had a newfound appreciation for it. In high school, I didn't appreciate them, but in college I did, and that was very strange because that was strange to me because I'm like, how can I change my opinion on a book when, I my understanding of art was just, I would read it, I would listen to a song like a rap song, for example, and I would think this song was really good, and I would continue to think that for 4 or 5 years, and then I would think this song really sucks, and my opinion never changed about that song, never. So I never had opinion changes on art, and then when I got to college, I remember reading a page of The Catcher in the Rye, something I read in high school, which I loathed at the time, and I was like, shit, this thing is really good. And so, I thought, you know what, I'm gonna pick this book up. I'm gonna try it. Europe, a writer, and I have ambitions as a writer. Haha, Tupac reference, if you get it. And um, going to France. I wanted to learn French at one point. That changed, but going to France, going to Europe, and exploring, not necessarily to become a writer, I thought, but Europe always fascinated me because of its, rich historical tradition. But yeah, this book just, I was like, okay, I'm gonna pick it up, and it looked inviting. I liked the cover. A picture of Hemingway there, and a feast, and a movable feast. It sounds inviting enough. So yeah, that's why I picked this book up. I read it about a year ago, and I dropped it because I got sick, and I just lost track of time, and I lost track of this book. I checked it out. I was like, oh, I'm almost done with this book. I might as well finish it, and I loved it. I thought it was really good. So that's my actual opinion of the book. It took me a while to get into it, but yeah, I loved the book, and I thought it was great. It wasn't as I was looking for a much more fantastic view of Paris because a writer has this responsibility to at the time to beautify, to almost sensationalize where they are at and make everything look amazing, and their struggles not so amazing, and not focus on their struggles and focus on Paris and how idyllic in paradise and how this place is paradise. But it wasn't like that, and you know what, all the better for it. I actually thought that was a good thing. So yeah, that's what I thought about the books. This is my haul. It took me a while to review these books. Oh, and I have one more book I need to review. Excuse me. Saga by Brian Vaughan and Giona something. Fonda or something like that. Excuse me, I don't remember what her name is, the artist. I thought it was an amazing comic book. Amazing comic book series because I read two comic books. And it was like this big. They were pretty thick. They're like bigger than this. So yeah, I thought that it was amazing, and yeah, I really liked it. I was really surprised because I'm like, sometimes comic books are really hit or miss. You get this book that's really weighed down by corporate, views on corporate, I don't know, guidelines, and they get weighed down. And this book was slightly, I could feel it, the corporate, because of the plot. It's plot driven, and sometimes when they're plot driven, they're just really cheesy, but this book was not. And I guess lately what I'm feeling is that when I pick up a book, I'm looking at it to not fail me. I'm not looking for it to be amazing. I'm just looking for it not to fail me, because that's what I think is important to me. Because once you get to a certain stage, just time passes, and your appreciation of wine is kind of like appreciation of wine, where as you get older you appreciate it more, just like when you have a more exquisite taste, and that's kind of how I view comic books and all books in general. I mean, with canonical books, I don't fear that they're gonna fail me because they're canonical for a reason. That's what I tell myself. But even though I have problems with the canon, but with comic books especially, and how repetitious the comic book form is, and how dearly it grasps for its corporate guideline and incentive to make a dollar. It just, it's just like plot for the sake of, instant gratification. And I do love instant gratification, but I don't like the fact that, they're really generic. And, these books are really hit or miss. And this book was like a home run, guys. It was unique. The monsters in the book were really unique. There was like this Spider Woman who was in love with this man. So it was like hybridity. There was a gay couple. Um, there was old love. There was young love. There was foolish love. There was ambitious love. There's righteous love. There's love of a child, and the whole time you get the perspective, the narration of a child telling you all these things. So that was unique, and the art was good. It wasn't like realistic, but it was really good nonetheless. The story was really captivating. It was plot driven, so you get a lot of plot there, guys. And there's a lot of characters that die, and it doesn't feel senseless. And that's what I was looking for, and it was great. So yeah, those are my reviews. This is my wrap up for the month. Thanks for watching.